This video is made possible by donations to the United States Lighthouse Society from people like you. I see a lot of the usual suspects here. It's great to have you as always on this crazy weather day in a lot of the country, as we were just talking about. Good luck to all of you with snow and cold and power failures and everything else. I'm happy you could be with us today. We already have well over 100 people here, and we got almost 250 who signed up for this event, which is fantastic. Usually I forget to introduce myself, but for those of you who don't know, I'm Jeremy D'Entremont. I'm the historian for the U.S. Lighthouse Society and host and producer of the podcast, the Society's podcast, Lighthearted. And with me today is Jeff Gales, Executive Director of the U.S. Lighthouse Society. Jeff will be joining in on the presentation today. Hi, Jeff. And you're in Southern California right now, right? How's the weather there?
Raining.
Yeah.
Lots of rain.
Lots of snow in parts of Southern California, I hear.
But I'm really excited about this presentation because Long Island happened to have been one of the very first trips I took when I started working at the Lighthouse Society. I actually met Bob Muller, who's on the call here, at that time. And the group out there was just fantastic and very warm and receptive. And the one thing I love about Long Island is that in a small geographic area, you have such a difference in architectural styles of lighthouses. So it's a great trip, and New York is an amazing state to go visit just in general, but Long Island in particular for lighthouses, you get a lot of bang for your buck by visiting Long Island.
I agree with all of the above. And you mentioned Bob Muller. Bob is with us today via cell phone from upstate New York. Nowhere near his home, which is farther south in New York, but Bob is actually, I think, actually taking part in like a snow bike race this weekend in upstate New York, and I'm so happy he was able to figure out a way to join us today, and he'll be taking part as well. And just to mention who Bob is for people who don't know, Bob Muller has a long association with the U.S. Lighthouse Society. He's been on the podcast a couple of times. He's president of the Long Island chapter of the U.S. Lighthouse Society, author of the book Lighthouses, Long Island's Lighthouses Past and Present, which is easily the best book ever written on the lighthouses of Long Island. He is joining us today to chip in here and there with some commentary on the lighthouses we're going to be seeing on the tour in May. And I'm so happy you could be here. Thanks, Bob. You can unmute yourself, Bob. You're allowed to. Whoop, you're still muted. You got to click the microphone. We're not hearing.
There we go.
There you go. That's much better.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
You're so welcome. Thank you. And feel free to chime in whenever the mood hits you, okay? Because I know you have a lot of personal experience with these lighthouses, and also
careful what you ask for.
Okay, maybe a little bit about the current preservation efforts for some of these places too. So I'm going to go right into the presentation at this point. I'm going to share my screen. So this, just give me a moment here. This tour we're talking about today. You should all be seeing my screen at this point. The tour we're talking about will be this coming May 13th to 20th. And I've done a number of USLHS tours in the last few years. This will be my first time leading a tour on my own. I'm really looking forward to that. And it's almost in my backyard. I live here in New Hampshire, so I'm in the Northeast at least. And I've seen a lot of these lighthouses before, but I have to admit I have not seen all of them up close and personal. So it's very exciting for me. So I'm going to ask that you all mute your microphones, please, for now. Somebody's speaking. If you could all make sure your microphones are muted until the end, we'll do some Q&A. So again, please keep your mics muted. Thank you. All right, so let me show you a map, or actually maps here, because Google Maps wouldn't let me put this all on one map, so I did it as two. So the upper map is the first half of the tour, and the lower map is the second half. And of course, that's Long Island. You've got New York City, Manhattan, Staten Island off to the left. And actually on the upper map, you can see a little bit of the tour is going to go into Staten Island and Manhattan, as I'll talk about. But most of it's on Long Island. And if you look on both maps, if you can see, I don't know if you can all read it, whatever screens you're looking at, but the Hilton Garden Inn Islip MacArthur Airport is right in the middle. And that's going to be our home base for this tour. And let me show you. This is the place. And, those of you who are very experienced tour goers with the USLHS know that usually on a lot of these tours, if you're lucky, you might get to be in a hotel for 2 or 3 nights, but there's a lot of changing, and sometimes you might go a few days in a row where you're going to a new hotel every day. That can't be helped sometimes, and it's all part of the experience. And but it's can be kind of a pain to get your bags down early in the morning for several days in a row. So it's going to be a real luxury to be at the same hotel for the entire tour. I think that's a real nice part of this one. So we will be at the Hilton Garden Inn. There's a restaurant there. We'll have some of the dinners there, and we'll have our breakfasts there. And right near the hotel is the MacArthur Airport. And the picture here, I think, is actually LaGuardia Airport in New York. But there's the smaller airport, the MacArthur Airport there in the center of Long Island. And several airlines fly there. So those of you coming on the tour, you can look into whether you can fly in on American or Breeze or Frontier or Southwest Airlines. Or if you're flying into JFK or LaGuardia airports in New York City, there's a variety of shuttles you can take to the Hilton Garden Inn in Islip. And doing some online searching, I found Bella's car service has what seems to be the lowest price for any shuttle of $124 for 1 or 2 people, which is not bad. So that's how I'm going to be getting there. I'm going to be in New York City for a day or two before the tour starts, and then take the shuttle over to Islip. All right, so the day one is going to be Saturday, May 13th. Of course, we'll have our welcome dinner as always, as these tours always begin. And that'll be at the Hilton Garden Inn on Saturday the 13th. And then on the next day, which is Mother's Day, the 14th, we're actually going to be crossing over to Staten Island and Manhattan for that day. The rest of the tour will be entirely on Long Island. And on that day, day 2, we are going to go to the National Lighthouse Museum on Staten Island. And this is very exciting for me. I've been on Staten Island a couple of times not too long ago, but I have not been there since the National Lighthouse Museum opened. So I am really looking forward to this. And let me just give you a little bit of background about the National Lighthouse Museum. Let me show you some historic pictures of the site there. Beginning in 1799, the present site of the National Lighthouse Museum on the North Shore of Staten Island was the location of the New York Marine Hospital, which was known as the Quarantine. And then constructed on the former hospital site in 1862 by the U.S. Lighthouse Service, the Staten Island Lighthouse Depot was a key manufacturing, storage, supply, and maintenance center for the Lighthouse Service's 3rd District, which extended from Sandy Hook in the south, north to Albany, east to Massachusetts. The Staten Island Depot reached its peak size around the time of World War I. With the Lighthouse Service's merger into the Coast Guard in 1939, the depot continued, but during World War II, it became more of a ship repair and outfitting space. And let me mention on the upper left there, that was that superstructure, that lighthouse superstructure is used to test lenses and so forth. but that became the Romer Shoal Lighthouse in New York Harbor. It was actually moved from the depot. Like, they saved some money and didn't have to build a new lighthouse. They moved it out to Romer Shoal. After budget cuts and consolidation in the 1960s, the Staten Island Depot was closed in 1965. The land was donated to the city of New York in 78, and some of the buildings were destroyed, but today building 11 of the old depot has become the National Lighthouse Museum, and several of the other buildings are still standing. They need renovation. There are plans to build expand the museum into Building 10 within the next few years. So here are some of the exhibits in the museum. You've got some Fresnel lenses on display and exhibits on lighthouse history. There's an exhibit on the upper right there on Black lighthouse keepers and so forth. So it's still a fairly new operation. It's great to see this because I go back to the 90s, to the earlier incarnations of the board that tried to get this place going. It didn't work out back then for a variety of reasons, but Linda D'Anto and the staff there has done a good job of getting this launched. Jeff, I don't know if you want to add anything about that.
Well, just that, for people who don't know, and if I'm not mistaken, one of the reasons why this site was chosen for the National Lighthouse Museum was because historically it's very significant. It is the last fairly intact depot left in the US. There used to be many in the US. This is the last one, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right, Jeremy?
I believe that's right. Bob Muller might have a
Yeah, Bob. Yeah, Bob.
Yeah.
Can you
Okay.
chime in, Bob, on that?
Or maybe not.
Okay. Well, and also on site are these really interesting Revolutionary War bunkers as well. That's off to the back end of the depot, which I don't know what's going to happen with those, but the whole site is very historic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, very much looking forward to it. And we're going to get a guided tour of the museum from a man by the name of Bob Isley. And Bob has been volunteering there since 2010. I'm told just about every day as a tour guide and handyman. So we're very lucky to have him as a tour guide. And Bob, in an email a few days ago, told me that he will have 9 passport stamps available, which is pretty amazing. One for the museum itself and for several of the lighthouses we're going to be seeing. And Glenn Swanson, I'm not sure if he's here with us today, but Glenn actually mailed me a list of stamps that'll be available during the tour. So I will work on putting that together, kind of consolidating sources on that. But there's going to be opportunities for a lot of stamps, passport stamps, for people who are into that, for sure. Okay. All right. So after the visit to the National Lighthouse Museum and lunch on that first day, we're going to go over to Manhattan, up to Manhattan. And by the way, we will be traveling by motor coach on this tour. I don't know if that's clear to everybody. There's going to be a couple of cruises involved, which I'll talk about, but basically bus or motor coach. And unlike some of the tours, on some tours, like the Ireland tour I did in July, we had to switch into smaller buses in a lot of places because some of the places weren't accessible to a large bus. I don't think that's going to be the case on this one. I think we'll be able to stay on the same vehicle the whole time, which is nice. So we're going to go over to Manhattan to South Street Seaport at in lower Manhattan. And just a little background. Well, first of all, there's several vessels docked there, including the Ambrose lightship, which you see there, which we're going to tour. A new main channel into the port of New York was dredged in the early 1900s. It was named for John Wolfe Ambrose, who was a New York businessman who had a lot to do with it. It was basically his pleas that led to the formation of that channel. The Sandy Hook Lightship Station was relocated slightly to the entrance of the new channel. It was renamed Ambrose, and a new ship, the LV-87, was built at Camden, New Jersey. It's 112 feet long, steel-hulled, 2 masts, as you see, 3 lanterns on each mast originally. The last lightship on the station was removed in 1967 and replaced by a so-called Texas tower. Today, the LV-87 is moored at Pier 16 at South Street Seaport on the East River, and it's one of several historic vessels that are open for tours by the South Street Seaport Museum. And we have had it confirmed that we will get a guided tour of the lightship and also the neighboring tall ship that's docked right there called the Waver Tree. I have toured the Ambrose before, but not the Waver Tree. So this is great. Depending on the size group we have, we might do half on one and switch back and forth and that kind of thing. But this is an 1885 tall ship, and the tour will include the main deck and quarter deck. We'll learn about how people worked and lived aboard a 19th century cargo sailing vessel, from the captain and ship's officers and cooks and crew. We'll visit the cargo hold and get a great view of the massive main cargo area. So this is an added bonus.
And Jeremy, just so
yeah,
everybody knows that all lightships, remaining lightships in America are all designated National Historic Landmarks, which is a pretty high honor. There's only a few left compared to how many were built originally. So when you visit a lightship, it's actually a National Historic Landmark.
that's absolutely right. Yeah, there are about a dozen lightships left in existence. And as you said, that's out of several dozen that existed not that many years ago. So it's great that this one has been so well preserved and is open to the public. And lightships are a really important part of this history. They don't necessarily get talked about that much. But they're, for the people who don't know, they're basically floating lighthouses that were put in places where, for one reason or another, it was difficult or impossible to put a lighthouse. So right down the street from the piers there at South Street Seaport is the Titanic Memorial Lighthouse. And we're going to walk over to that, just a few minutes walk. This tower stands at the corner of Fuller and Pearl Streets, and it is owned by the South Street Seaport Museum. From 1913 to 68, it was a familiar site on its location atop the Seamen's Church Institute, as you see there on the right, overlooking the East River. The Seamen's Church Institute was founded as a relief society in 1834, and it's affiliated with the Episcopal Church. In the early years of the 20th century, the Seamen's Church Institute announced plans for this 12-story headquarters in Lower Manhattan. The cornerstone was laid on April 16th, 1912, the day after news was received of the sinking of the Titanic. And of course, many prominent New Yorkers were among the 1,500 lives lost on the Titanic. The lighthouse was built by public subscription to commemorate the heroism displayed by many in the tragedy, as well as to remember those who lost their lives. The lighthouse was actually an aid to navigation for some years. It displayed a fixed green light visible throughout New York Harbor, all the way to Sandy Hook. Surmounting the tower was a so-called time ball. There's actually a kind of a representation of it there on top of the tower now. The time ball was to be hoisted 5 minutes before noon, Monday through Friday, and dropped at the precise moment a telegraphic signal signifying noon was received from Washington, D.C. After the Seamen's Church Institute relocated, the building was demolished. The lighthouse was moved to where it is now and went to ownership under the South Street Seaport Museum. It was put where it is now in 1976. There's a current restoration effort. The plan is to move the lighthouse back to the waterfront near its original location as a so-called beacon of hope at Pier 16. Adrian Saker is spearheading that restoration effort. He's been on the podcast, and he is going to meet us there when we walk over to the lighthouse on the tour. Adrian will meet us and give us an update on the restoration effort. And they've made a lot of progress lately, so I think you'll be hearing a lot of news about that coming up. And then that same day, late in the afternoon, we're going to go up a little bit to the north on the west side of Manhattan to the Frying Pan Lightship. And I have not been to this before. So we'll at the very least have a photo op of the Frying Pan Lightship. We are working on possibly dinner. There's a adjacent Pier 66 bar and grill next to the lightship, and I understand there's actually some seating on the lightship itself. So we're working on arranging a tour and a dinner there, but at the very least we'll get a good photo op there. Built in 1929, Lightship 115 Frying Pan garnered its namesake Frying Pan Shoals which are 30 miles off of Cape Fear, North Carolina. I was there from 1930 to 65, and it's 133 feet long, quite a substantial vessel. After being abandoned for 10 years while docked at an oyster cannery on Chesapeake Bay, the ship sank due to a broken pipe. It was underwater for 3 years before being raised, and it was sold to its present owners and sailed to New York City. So it's pretty amazing that it was saved. And as we were saying before, it's only one of only, I think, about 12 or 13 lightships in the U.S. that are still in existence. And it's now docked at this Hudson River Park in Manhattan. And again, the Pier 66 Maritime Bar and Grill is next to it on a floating railroad barge with a fireboat also alongside, and I believe a railroad caboose on display. And Jeff, you've been there before, right?
Yes, I've been there. I never ate there, but I had some, I think I had a cocktail or a beer there with the group. It was actually really lovely. They do a good job there, and you can tour the whole vessel if they're open. So hopefully they're gonna be open for the group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're working on it. It's the off season, so sometimes it can be a little difficult to make to arrange all these details.
Do
Yeah.
you know where the origin from, what's with frying pan shoal? What is with frying pan?
What an excellent question.
Yeah.
What an excellent question. I don't know the answer to that. There's
Well,
probably somebody here who does know the answer.
I just Googled it, and
Okay. Go ahead.
apparently frying pan represents shoals that extend over 28 miles long, which resemble an actual frying pan.
Aha.
There you go.
Okay. Well, you learn something every day. Thank heaven for Google. All right. All right. So after that, that's the end of day 2. So moving on to day 3, we're going to go to City Island, which is, I think, a really interesting place. City Island is a neighborhood in the northeastern Bronx in New York City. That's on an island of the same name, obviously, City Island, extreme western end of Long Island Sound. It's home to about 4,000 people. And I love this. I had to tell you about this. According to local tradition, anyone actually born on City Island is known as a clam digger. A City Island resident not born on the island is known as a mussel sucker. I don't know what they call tourists. I don't think I want to know, but I don't think we qualify as either clam diggers or mussel suckers. We'll be something below that. But anyway, a small fleet of boats on City Island takes people out on fishing trips on Long Island Sound. We're going to go out on one of those boats with the Island Current fleet. I'm not sure if we're going to be on the boat you see in this picture. They have one or two others, but we will be going out with them, and we're going to see 3 lighthouses on that cruise. There's where the red circles are, or where the lighthouses are that we're going to see. And here are the 3 lighthouses we're going to see on that cruise. And the one on the left, Sands Point, is actually among the older lighthouses in New York. And let me just give you a little background on it. It's actually the 3rd oldest lighthouse standing on Long Island. It's no longer active. It began service in 1809. In 1917, a large plot of land next to the lighthouse was purchased by a wealthy New York socialite who built that big mansion you see next to the lighthouse there. And then in 1922, the light was moved from the lighthouse to an automated light on a steel tower, skeleton tower nearby. The lighthouse property and the mansion were sold. Mrs. O.H.P. Belmont of the famous Belmont family purchased the property, but then just a few years later, she sold the property to William Randolph Hearst. I'm sure you all know who he was, for $400,000. That was a lot of money in the 20s. For a while, the Hearsts lived at the keeper's house and used the mansion as a guest house. But then Hearst, of course, started spending a lot of time at his property in on the central California coast. And the Sands Point property was sold again and ended up being divided up into lots. And there is a residential development there today. So there is a more modern lantern room put on top of the tower. That's not the original one, but it seems to be pretty well preserved. And Bob Muller, I'll just, if you feel free to jump in at any time if you have any comment on these places.
Yeah, the thing about Sands Point that stands out in my mind, because it's such an old lighthouse, the first keeper there is a guy that was a Revolutionary War veteran,
Mm.
named Noah Mason. I believe he had been injured in the Battle of Rhode Island, and they say that during the War of 1812, while he was lighthouse keeper there, he actually saw a naval battle out in the Long Island Sound. So, you know, as an Army veteran myself, I wonder how this old war vet was, what it felt like to be on shore watching the ships fight the British again. It must have been an interesting thing for him up there.
Yeah, I would say so. There's so much history in this area. So let me tell you a little bit about Execution Rocks in the middle here. The island or rock, I don't know if it even qualifies as an island, Execution Rock or Rocks is claimed to derive its name from colonial New York, when slave-owning settlers of Sands Point supposedly murdered enslaved people by chaining them to the rocks at low tide, and then the tide would come up and they would drown, so they say. I've also seen places where they claim that British soldiers in the Revolution would tie American soldiers there and kill them that way. I don't think that's true, partly because Execution Rocks was known by that name going back to 1766, prior to the Revolution. I read that a more likely origin of the name is that British Admiralty named it Executioner's Rock because so many ships ran aground on the treacherous rocks, which seems more likely. This 55-foot tall stone lighthouse was built in 1849. In 2009, it was transferred to an organization called Historically Significant Structures. Some of you may have known Craig Morrison, who was the head of that. He, for a while, ran tours and overnight stays there. Sadly, Craig passed away a couple of years ago. I'm not sure of the current status of what's going on there. Bob Muller may have some inside knowledge of that.
I have not heard either. I was talking to Pam Setchell about that a few months ago. I don't think nobody on Long Island seems to know what the current status is out there.
So it seems to be kind of in limbo at the moment, but hopefully we'll get some good news on that front.
But
And then we have,
Graham, but that I'm sorry to interrupt, but that image of people being strapped to the rocks at low tide and slowly being killed by the tide raising, how horrifying.
yeah, whether it's true or not, I mean, it probably happened somewhere. I'm not sure if it happened here, but yeah, it's certainly, it's like something out of Edgar Allan Poe or something.
Yeah, I need, Jeremy, just to butt in on that one. I've never found any evidence of that. You know how I'm sure most people on this in this meeting know that people like to mythologize about lighthouses because they're mysterious, you know, neat places, and I think that's what's gone on out there. The other thing you hear about Execution Rocks, if I forget to mention it, if I'm out doing a lecture locally and I forgot to mention, you know, if I don't mention this about Execution Rocks, somebody will raise their hand and ask, but you know, there's a whole big mythology about it being haunted, and as far as who's haunting it depends upon who's telling the story at the time. So I had the opportunity to talk to a couple of Execution Rocks Coast Guardsmen years ago when I was writing the book, and that nobody ever heard of anything strange going on out there, but it makes for great stories, and that's a part of the appeal of lighthouses, I guess.
Absolutely, and ghost stories are part of the fabric of so many of these places, and you know, so I've certainly repeated many of them myself, and I'm an open-minded skeptic, as I always say. So, but they're very much a part of these places. So, Stepping Stones Lighthouse is an interesting place, and I know Bob's going to probably want to say something about that. But let me just give you a little quick background. According to a Native American legend, there was a giant devil that caused a lot of mayhem around there, and the giant was chased from the area by warriors. He threw huge rocks at them across Long Island Sound. Some of the boulders landed in the sound, and he used them as stepping stones to make an escape, hence the name Stepping Stones. The lighthouse was built in 1876 to warn mariners of the dangerous rocks and to serve as a guide to the East River. The light was automated in 1964. The lighthouse was awarded to the town of North Hempstead in 2008 under the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act. It's in very poor condition, in need of desperate need of repair. There has been talk that it might actually need to be demolished and replaced by a modern light of some kind. But there is a major restoration effort. It was featured on the podcast Lighthearted, our podcast not too long ago, and Bob Muller was one of the guests, along with Bob Lincoln, another leader of the effort there. So, Bob, any current recent news that we might not know about regarding the lighthouse there?
Well, one of the things that I stress when I talk about lighthouses is how they are a microcosm of America as a whole, and Stepping Stones is living up to that. The problem we're having there is there's a lot of political infighting. The two different parties within the town of North Hempstead are fighting each other, and whatever one wants to do, the other one doesn't want to do. So they're fighting against some of the town council people are fighting against the lighthouse. We had been working with the town of Hempstead really well for several years. I've been with the Stepping Stones Committee since 2015, made some headway, started getting the dock built. COVID hit, they had problems with the contractor, the dock for the lighthouse. It's an offshore light, so you need access to it. The dock never got finished. The town of North Hempstead had an election and changed, and they have been in deadlock since then. We, as you know, Jeremy, we've brought a lot of media attention to it. CBS TV, Newsday, News 12 on Long Island, various newspapers, local and regional, and it's put some pressure on them. And they did agree to put it in the capital plan, but now they become deadlocked. At last month's town board meeting, they were going to vote about whether to assign the contract again to finish the dock, and that motion got tabled. So we're going back on March 14th at their next one to try to push them on it. We just had a Zoom meeting 2 days ago about that. It's a big concern. If they don't do something, we may talk to the federal government about the government taking it back, and then maybe look to find a way to take it over as a nonprofit and move forward from there. It's a real shame because it has access, even though it's offshore, you can access from Stepping Stones Park, and the Park District is very good about allowing us access. In fact, the head of our committee, Bob Lincoln, who you interviewed on the podcast, is retired commissioner of the Park District. So we have a lot of cooperation, and we can get out there with a boat. It's just the town is just not doing its job, unfortunately. I don't mean to sound cynical or cast dispersions, but that's just frankly what's going on there. It's very disturbing right now.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the update. And I was thinking, you used the term political infighting. I think politics and infighting are just two words for the same thing, really. But it's not for lack of trying that the more progress hasn't been made. So we wish you all the best with that. And maybe when we get some good news, we can cover it on the podcast again. But anyway, thank you for updating us. And we'll keep our fingers crossed about that. So after our cruise from City Island, we're going to go to the City Island Nautical Museum, which displays maritime artifacts and antiques and exhibits on the history of City Island and also local maritime history. And of course, there's also a gift shop. Excuse me. One more thing I just want to mention about City Island before I move on. There was a movie, a 2009 movie called City Island. Those of you who are coming on the tour, or even if you're not, you might want to check it out. In that movie, Andy Garcia, who I'm sure a lot of you know, played a prison guard who was taking acting lessons and keeping it a secret from his family. It was a fun movie. It was a comedy, and it really gave you a feeling for life in this unique neighborhood, City Island. So I recommend that you check that out. And moving on to day 4. That morning, we are going to go to Oldfield Point Lighthouse, which is about 4 miles west of the entrance to Port Jefferson Harbor. This light station was established in 1823, and this lighthouse was built in 1869. I think it's a beautiful style. It's similar to a few lighthouses built in the Northeast around that time. You had Sheffield Island Light, Norwalk, Connecticut, Great Captain Island in Greenwich, Connecticut, Block Island, North Light in Rhode Island. Very handsome granite building.
Plum Island was the other one there, Jeremy. That was
Plum
the 6th
Island.
one.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. Yeah, and Plum Island is, we're going to see Plum Island Lighthouse on this tour as well. So the lighthouse here was replaced by an automatic light on a skeleton tower in 1933. And it was the property was conveyed to the village of Old Field, and it is used for village offices today. It is not normally open or accessible to the public. So we are special, and I know Bob has some personal history of this place. Bob, would you like to add anything about this?
Yeah, this is another project that I'm involved in. The village, like as you say, has had an agreement with the federal government since 1933. It was the Coast Guard took it back during World War II for a little while, but the village uses it. They have their offices in it. It has an amazing amount of original materials, walls, trim work. Still, it's really it's amazing for its age, what's there, but it needs a lot of work. And again, there's been some issues with the village. The village finally seems to be willing to move forward. They've hired an engineering firm. We're a little concerned that the firm that they have hired has no historic experience, but they've shut everybody out of anything for decision when that came to that. They're applying for a bond. We'll be doing some fundraising, so I'll know more about that certainly by the time you guys show up. It's right
Yeah.
down the street from where I work, so I can probably even be there, and I'm sure I can get one of the village trustees to let us in and take a tour for the day. We may not be able to go to the top of it. It needs some work in the tower. One of the stairs is loose, so it's not completely safe. But the near future looks promising, so it should at least get stabilized. And we'll see how that works over the next few years, though.
Yeah, it sounds good, and thank you for your help on this one. So I hope we'll be able to meet you there that morning. Then we're going to Eaton's Neck, and this is actually one of the oldest lighthouse towers in the country. Constructed in 1798, authorized by President John Adams, it's the second oldest lighthouse tower in New York. We're talking about the oldest one in a minute. 73-foot stone tower. The keeper's house here was demolished in 1969. 11 Coast Guard housing units are added to the station. So it is on an active Coast Guard station. You can see the modern buildings around it. The lighthouse still shows a white light from its classical third order Fresnel lens. The only, correct me if this is wrong, Bob, but I believe it's the only Fresnel lens still in active use in a Long Island lighthouse.
You're absolutely right on that. Yeah, it's an 1855 lens from the Henri Lepeau company, actually. Yeah, made just outside of Paris. There, it is the only one. There's an LED light in it now. That's what's there, but it is still that original lens. It's a fixed white lens with a reflector plate on the back. It doesn't reflect well anymore because I haven't kept it up, but the plate is still there. Yeah.
Okay, that's kind of a new thing, putting LEDs inside Fresnel lenses. That's been happening in a lot of places recently, so that's a fairly recent development. Normally, the station here, the lighthouse and grounds, are off limits to the public. I have been able to arrange a tour with the Coast Guard Auxiliary, so we're going to get in there, which is fantastic. Not too many people do. All right. Then we're going to go to this Vanderbilt Museum in Centerport. I believe it's run by Suffolk County. I think that's correct.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, it was historically known as Eagle's Nest. It was the summer home of William K. Vanderbilt II, who was the great grandson of Cornelius Vanderbilt. It was built in 1910 as an English cottage, I guess originally a lot smaller than what's there now. Over the next 30 years, it grew into this sprawling 24-room Spanish Revival mansion you see here. And it was built with a lot of living space, but also museum space where Vanderbilt could show off his collection of thousands of natural history and cultural specimens that he collected from around the world. So I don't know if Jeff or Bob, if you want to add anything about this. I don't know if the gardens will be in bloom when we're there, but it sure looks beautiful. Nope, nothing to add about that. I'm looking forward to it. I have not been there.
Yeah,
And
it is nice, Jeremy. It's the grounds are good. There's a planetarium on site there as well. They do laser light shows they've been doing for years in there. And there's There's one building called the Hall of Fishes that has a lot of preserved marine specimens in them. It's a little creepy. I don't know if anybody's going to want to, but if you have that kind of morbid curiosity, that might be a spot to go look at while you're there.
Okay. Well, growing up, I always wanted to be a marine biologist, so maybe I'll find that interesting. But anyway, yeah, it looks like a fun place to visit. I'm not sure if I should admit this, but I have not been to Fire Island Lighthouse before. So this is going to be a thrill because this is one of the great lighthouses of the Northeast. Fire Island, of course, is along, I guess you'd call it a barrier island, right along the south side of Long Island there.
Yep.
Yep. Go ahead, Bob.
No, that's correct. It's a barrier island. You have the Great South Bay on the north side of it, and then you have the Atlantic Ocean on the south side of it. So it's got water either way you look there.
Yep. Fire Island Lighthouse was an important landmark for transatlantic ships coming to New York around the turn of the last century, or in the 1800s. For many European immigrants, it was their first sight of land upon arrival in America. And the first lighthouse was completed in 1826. So it was too short. It was 74 feet. That's pretty tall, but it was considered too short to be effective. So in 1857, funds were appropriated for the new lighthouse that stands today. Brick tower, 168 feet tall, lit November 1st, 1858, had a first order Fresnel lens. And I believe that's on display on the site today. The light was decommissioned in 1974, and local citizens grouped together to save the lighthouse, and it was restored to its 1939 condition. On Memorial Day 1986, it was relit as an aid to navigation. And in 1996, the Fire Island Lighthouse Preservation Society took over maintenance and operation of the light station. So we're going to get a guided tour of the museum and tower. And originally we were going to get there at 10 a.m., but I was told to get there earlier because all the school groups are going to arrive at 10 a.m. So we're planning to be there at like 8:30 a.m. and we'll be out of there before the school groups arrive. So I don't know if Jeff or Bob, if you want to add anything about Fire Island.
Yeah, Fire Island's kind of my home lighthouse. It's pretty close to where I live. Spent a lot of time. I grew up on the Great South Bay. Caught my first fish right near that lighthouse, and also, yeah, that's a great place. In May, it should be really nice right there. It's a good area for bird migration. It's in the Atlantic Flyway, and they actually do birds tagging and studies right near the lighthouse there. So bring binoculars for this one. Sometimes you'll see whales offshore. There's foxes and deer around. It's an interesting place. Hawks are pretty common in the area. One of the things that I want to point out, Jeremy, is there are 3 remnants on Long Island from the Stephen Pleasanton era, and I'm sure a lot of people here are lighthouse nerds and know what that means. So, but from between 1820 and 1852, when Stephen Pleasanton ran the lighthouse service, and it wasn't in very good shape. So, those 3 bits that are still there, everybody on this tour is still going to see. You have the base of the original tower at Fire Island is still there. You're going to see that. You're also going to see the Execution Rocks Tower, which is the only lighthouse on Long Island still standing from that period. And the original keeper's quarters at Oldfield Point, which were from 1823 when the original lighthouse was built there. So this is a nice collection of things for everybody to see, and that not many Long Islanders have seen all 3 of those things. So
yeah,
good call on that.
That's really cool. Thank you for pointing all that out.
I'd like to add, if I could.
I'm not sure who's talking, but who is this? I'm sorry.
Bill Froelich.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead, Bill.
Hi. As my wife and I volunteer there, and I just like to point out that you can get up close and personal to a first order lens, which was the original lens from 1858. It's in a separate building, but you can get almost close enough to touch it and look through it, and it's just amazing.
Yeah. That's a really good point. My voice is echoing back at me there, but that's a really good point. Thank you very much, Bill. I very much look forward to seeing that. It's absolutely a great thing that it was saved and put on display there, which hasn't happened in too many places. So thank you. And I don't know if you'll be there the day we're there, but maybe, but I know we've been told we'll get a guided tour that day.
Yeah,
So
Jeremy, if nobody's available from the Fire Island Society, yeah, I can do it. I'll take that day off anyway. That's fine. Give me an
excellent.
excuse to go to the fire. I used to give tours there, but I just haven't in a while, just because you know how life gets in the way. But I'm always happy to go back over there, have an excuse. So if nobody else can do it, I certainly will volunteer.
Well, even if somebody else is showing us around, if you could be there too, that'd be absolutely fantastic. So thank you.
That would be great. Thanks.
Thank you, Bob. And if I'm ashamed to admit that I haven't been to Fire Island Lighthouse, I'm maybe even more ashamed to admit I have not been to the Montauk Lighthouse before. I have photographed it from the water, but I have not actually been up to it close and personal. It is, I think, one of the iconic lighthouses of the country, really. It's at the easternmost tip of Long Island, oldest lighthouse in New York State, completed in 1796. On a spot where the British Royal Navy had maintained signal bonfires during the Revolution. President George Washington authorized the construction of this lighthouse after many ships had been lost on the reefs around Montauk. Excuse me, the builder was John Macomb Jr., an important architect who was responsible for a number of early lighthouses. Excuse me. And again, it's an 80-foot sandstone tower. Really interesting thing about this lighthouse is that it was originally 300 feet from the edge of the bluff. It's now only about 50 feet and has been very much threatened by erosion in recent years. And actually millions of dollars have been spent on erosion control methods. And I know that I think my friend Dan May, retired Coast Guard Rear Admiral Dan May be in our audience today. And he's had a lot of personal experience with the erosion control at Montauk. Dan, are you here? You can unmute yourself if you're.
I am, Jeremy. Thanks.
Hey, Dan.
I just was able to jump on, just got back home from an event out this afternoon. But yeah, great. And I think it would be a great tour to visit Montauk. It is also one of the 12 National Historic Landmark lighthouses in the country. You think about all the nearly 500 lighthouses in America, only 12 are National Historic Landmarks, of which Montauk is one. So that's a thrill for people to see. And as you have shown there in the picture, Montauk has a 3.5 order clamshell Fresnel lens, which everyone will get a chance to get up close and personal to as well. That is a fabulous lens. It's just been completely restored and is in the best shape. That lens operated for from 1903 till 1986, so 83 years that lens operated. Now we've got some plans. I'm helping Montauk Historical Society. We've got some plans to hopefully will be successful in this, but to reestablish that lens in the tower as the operational aid. We're working with the Coast Guard. They've been very supportive. We're hoping we'll get there probably this time this summer. But for all of you that haven't been to Montauk, it's a fabulous, fabulous place. I did work back in my engineering days on designing a revetment that I'm proud to say is still standing 30 some years later. That back in the day when the Coast Guard still owned the property, I designed that revetment that's still there today. They've added to it, but it's quite a feature to see, and you can really see the battle with Mother Nature that they're up against. But should be a great tour.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan, for filling all that in.
Jeremy, this is Rick Tours. How are you?
Good. Yeah, go ahead, Rick.
I used to work for the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. I retired in 2013, but with the Army Corps of Engineers and the Historical Society, we did a feasibility study for redoing the revetment there. And you'll see the project, there was some logistics and funding and so on. But anyway, the good news is there's a $30 million project for the restoration of the revetment that's about 90% completed. And so that, the earlier projects were only going to be good for 15 or 20 years. And the project that's being done right now for the revetment shall keep it there for 100 years or more. So they utilized the 7-ton stones that were there in place done during the 95 project, and they stockpiled them, and they came in with 15 to 18-ton toe stones as a base, and they've carried the stonework further up the hill so that it would be storm hardened from hurricanes and whatever. So it's a pretty cool project. It's about 95% done. And that's being done, the Army Corps, New York State DEC, and I believe the third party is the Suffolk County in the project.
Great. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Rick. Thank you for that update. That's all good news. And I want to mention I've had Mia Sertich, the director of Montauk. I guess she's the director of the Montauk Historical Society, right? I think I have that right. I had Mia and Henry Osmers, who's a longtime volunteer at the Lighthouse. I had them on the podcast, and Henry's going to give us a guided tour while we're there. He's a longtime volunteer and author of a book on Montauk. So that's going to be great to have him show us around.
Jeremy, one thing I'd like to point out on that. You mentioned John McComb was the builder of this lighthouse. He also built the Eden's Neck Lighthouse. So you're going to see both of his Long Island lighthouses on the tour.
Good point. Yeah. So he was one of the more important early lighthouse builders. And after we leave Montauk Lighthouse, we're going to have, I think it's going to be an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of free time in Montauk Village as well. See a bit of that. Now moving on to day 6, Horton Point Lighthouse. And this one was established in 1857. The light is 110 feet above the water. Originally, the house and tower were separate, but they were soon connected, as you see. In 1933, a skeletal metal tower about 50 feet away from the lighthouse replaced the lighthouse. The Southold Park District. Is it pronounced Southold? Am I saying that right, Bob?
Yeah, Southold is right.
Okay. I just was not 100% sure of that. Yeah. The Southold Park District acquired the property from the Department of Commerce for $1. A hurricane of 1938 actually blew a lot of the roof off the building. The Southold Historical Museum and Park District take care of the property, and in 2006, the museum inside was revamped with new exhibits, and we're going to get a guided tour here as well. Anything want to add before I move on, Bob?
Nothing in particular. There are some cool things on site, so maybe I'll take another day off of work and show. But this one too, there's a couple of cool things about the preservation there. One of the guy that headed the preservation, Cliff Benfield, was one of my mentors when I started, and so I got a lot of little inside info on some of the things that are there. There are some really cool things they did to honor former lighthouse keepers there.
Excellent. Right, and then we're going to go that same day to the East End Seaport Museum in Greenport, and Greenport was an important whaling port and shipbuilding port in the 19th century. From 1830 to 1850, over 500 registered vessels were built at Greenport shipyards, from schooners to barks. World War II brought another boom in shipbuilding. During the war, Greenport Basin and Construction Company built more than 50 small warships there. A popular exhibit at this museum is their Fresnel lenses. They have a second order lens on display. I think it's in the foreground in that picture on the right, the upper right there. Second order lens and also a fourth order lens that came from Plum Island Lighthouse. And very much looking forward to this. And after we go to the museum, we're going to do a cruise with them as well. And we are going to do a cruise that'll take us close to 5 lighthouses that afternoon. And here they are. First on the upper left is Long Beach Bar Lighthouse, commonly known as Bug Light to local people. It helps mariners navigate around a hazardous sandbar between Orient Harbor and Gardiner's Bay. Originally built in 1870 on screw piles, and it kind of looked like, I guess, a bug on tall legs, hence the name Bug Light. But arsonists destroyed the original Bug Light on the night of the 4th of July in 1963. East End Seaport Museum, as I understand it, was actually established to reconstruct the lighthouse. In 1989 and 90, hundreds of local residents contributed support and materials and equipment and labor to rebuild the lighthouse. Took only 60 days to build it, which is pretty incredible. And it's certainly a unique lighthouse restoration. You would never know that, at least from the outside, that's not the original lighthouse. East End Seaport Museum is responsible for taking care of the lighthouse structure. Coast Guard still maintains a light there. The lower left is Orient Point Lighthouse, a so-called spark plug type light or a caisson light, cast iron, off Orient Point, New York, in what's called Plum Gut, which is the narrow channel between Orient Point and Plum Island. It was built in 1899, automated in 1954, sold by the federal government in 2013. It is owned by an artist named Randy Palumbo, who I've had on the podcast. Really interesting guy. Over the last few years, he has transformed the interior of the lighthouse into an artist studio, a place for artist residency. I think he's had at least one or two artists stay there, but he wants to make it available to artists and writers and composers who want to be, quote, lost at sea for a week or more, unquote. I think it's a pretty cool project. Top center, you have Plum Island Lighthouse, built in 1869 on the western end of Plum Island. A steel skeletal tower has carried the light since 1978. The lighthouse here has been endangered by erosion in recent years. In 2000, East End Lighthouses was formed to spearhead the restoration, and they arranged for 15,000 tons of rocks to be brought out to the island to shore up the banks. And it's now that organization is now part of the East End Seaport Museum, and they are working with the Department of Homeland Security, which controls Plum Island, to restore the lighthouse. And Bob, I don't know if you have any up-to-date information on that. I know there was like an animal a scientific research center there involving.
The Plum Island Animal Disease Center was on there. I think they're talking about moving it to Kansas or so. That was on there for quite some time. The founding vice president of the Long Island chapter, and then later President Carol House, she was actually one of the virologists that worked out there for years. So that's there are some stories around. Nelson DeMille wrote a book called Plum Island. So I used to when we used to do tours, everybody used to ask me if I read that book. So eventually I had to read the book, and it was fairly accurate. It's a beautiful island. It'll be interesting to see what happens to it as the entire island gets privatized.
Yeah,
which it may.
That's a novel you're talking about, right? By Nelson DeMille. It was a fictional book.
Yep. It was it was pretty popular, I think, back around 2000-ish or so.
Yeah, I believe it was. Okay, so on the lower center, we've got Little Gull Island Lighthouse, which is about midway between Plum Island and Fisher's Island. First lighthouse built there in 1806, replaced by this 81-foot granite tower in 1869, had a second-order Fresnel lens, and automated in 1978, but still operational. In 2009, it was sold under the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act. The sale at that time for $381,000 was the highest that any lighthouse had gone for through that program. That has been topped since then. And it was sold to a man named Fred Plum, a Connecticut businessman. And he has said that he wants to restore it and open it to the public. I have not heard anything recently about it. Bob, I don't know if you have.
No, I haven't. I did hear a rumor that he may have passed away. So I don't know. I don't have anything recent on that, though.
Yeah. Well, we can hope anyway, but we'll get a good look at it on the cruise. Then you've got Race Rock Lighthouse there at the eastern end of Long Island Sound think it's a pretty amazing lighthouse. I've seen it a few times on cruises. The channel known as the Race is just off the western end of Fisher Island near Race Rock. The current there can reach 5 knots. In 1852, the Lighthouse Board noted that Race Rock was, quote, one of the most dangerous obstructions to navigation on the coast. So construction of the lighthouse began in 1871. Francis Hopkinson Smith, who was a very well-known structural engineer, also an artist and author, was contracted for the project. He also built the foundation for the Statue of Liberty, among other things. He later wrote a novel called Caleb West, Master Diver, that was based on his experiences building this lighthouse. It took 7 years just to build the foundation and pier, but then the lighthouse, the superstructure of the lighthouse itself just took like another year to build. Went into service in 1879, and it's usually referred to as a Gothic revival architectural style. In 2013, under the National Historic Lighthouse Preservation Act, it was transferred to the New London Maritime Society in New London, Connecticut. And I think Susan Tumulovich of the society might be with us today. Susan, are you here today? If you are, unmute yourself and say hi. I thought maybe she was going to attend, but maybe not.
Yes,
but
I'm
oh, you
here.
are.
I'm
Oh, okay.
here.
Hi, Susan.
And I wanted to say that David Henry is here also. He's the captain who takes people out to Plum Island, and he one day rescued Fred Plum, and that's how he's become the administrator for Little Gull.
Oh, wow.
So if you have questions about Little Gull, I think David is on this program.
Oh, okay.
Yes, we're revving to go on Race Rock
Oh,
and
that's
Little
exciting.
Gull and all the lighthouses. Very big programs for this year.
Yeah. Well, thank you for filling us in on that. So, Susan, your organization has run periodic tours to Race Rock, right?
Yes. Now Race Rock this year, we're going to be doing a lot of work to make it safe to work out there. Our phase one is to figure out a better way to land and to fix the railings. So this year, as in the past years, we may only do 2 or 4 tours to Race because it is dangerous to land.
Yeah.
But I think after this year, we may be able to do more.
Oh, that'd be great.
We did, working with David Henry, I will say, even rarer than going to Race Rock is Little Gull. And last year, David did, I think, 4 or 5 tours out to Little Gull, and that was absolutely amazing.
Oh, really? Okay, that's
Yeah.
news to me. I wasn't aware of those
Gorgeous.
tours to Little Gull. So
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful island.
yeah, yeah. And I'll just mention the New London Maritime Society. You also own New London Ledge Lighthouse and New London Harbor Lighthouse, and have run tours to those as well.
And we will this summer. We the Harbor Light tours. We had one today in the snow.
Huh.
But the Ledge Light we do Saturdays and Sundays throughout the summer. One tour a day. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you, Susan. And people should look up the New London Maritime Society website to learn more about all that. All right, let me move along here to the final day of the tour, day 7, May 19th. We're going to go in the morning to Huntington Harbor Lighthouse. In 1857, a lighthouse was built at the tip of Lloyd's Neck, marking the entrance to Lloyd Harbor and to serve vessels coming through the Gut into Huntington Harbor. In 1947, the original, the wooden structure of the original light was destroyed by fire by careless hunters. But I guess the ruins of the original Lloyd Neck Lighthouse can still be seen today. The new structure that you see here was built in 1912, and it's unique. It's been compared to a small castle. It's considered Venetian Renaissance or Beaux Art style. And the Coast Guard automated the light in 1949. And because there was no longer anybody living there, it kind of slipped into disrepair. By 1985, the Coast Guard was talking about destroying it and erecting a steel tower on the site. They relented when concerned citizens organized a preservation group. It is currently owned by the Huntington Lighthouse Preservation Society, and it is an active aid to navigation. It's got a modern LED, and I think some of you know Pam Setchell. I don't think Pam is here in our audience today, but Pam has been the spearhead of that preservation effort there. And they have an annual music festival there. And actually in this photograph, you can see the banner on the lighthouse there. It says, "Another successful music fest, thanks to all." Every year, I believe it's in September, there's a big music festival where they have bands actually play at the lighthouse and people watching it from their boats and listening. And it seems like an amazing event every year. So I don't know if Bob, if you have anything to add to that.
Jeremy, early on, Jeff made the point about the variety of styles and
Yes.
methods and materials of construction. Huntington certainly stands out for that one. It's the only reinforced concrete lighthouse in the area.
Right.
So that's pretty cool there. And if you do go from the roof of that lighthouse, or even from one of the windows inside, you can see some of the ruins of the original 1857 lighthouse. So again, if you've got binoculars, bring them along so you can get a good look.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So we are going to get a boat ride here, and we are going to get a tour of the lighthouse. So very much looking forward to that. Then later that day, we're going to go to this place, the Old Westbury House and Gardens, kind of in the center of Long Island. And this is something I wasn't aware of. It looks fantastic. Just a little background. It was the former home of John Phipps. John S. Phipps, his wife and children, completed in 1906 by an English designer. It's considered a Charles II style mansion nestled amid 200 acres of formal gardens, landscape grounds, woodlands, ponds, and lakes, furnished with fine English antiques and decorative arts from the Phipps family's years there. And I believe we're going to have lunch there on the grounds. There's a place called the Cafe in the Woods right there on the grounds, and that's where we'll have lunch that day. And then we're going to the Long Island Maritime Museum, which is committed to the research and preservation and interpretation of the region's rich nautical heritage and the role of Long Island in the national maritime story. Exhibits on boat building and shipwrecks and shellfish harvesting, recreational boating, etc. And it's going to be a nice last stop of our tour. Of course, we'll go back to the hotel and have the farewell dinner on Friday evening. And then I think most people will be flying out the following day, unless you choose to spend a couple more days or whatever in the area, maybe New York City. That's certainly an option. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. I'm going to come out of screen sharing here. And hello, everybody. And at this point, we can certainly open things up for Q&A. I don't know if anybody asked any questions in the chat. So that's...
There are, so the first one in the chat is, will they be able to get a view of Cedar Island Lighthouse from one of the boat rides?
Not that I'm aware of. I don't think so.
Maybe far in the distance while you're out around Orient Point and Plum Island.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the way to or from Montauk, but it's a little out of the way down some back roads, and you can see it from a bluff from Cedar Point County Park. But maybe that's something we can talk about, Jeremy, and maybe find a way to work that out on the way. If you want to sacrifice some time in Montauk Village, that's your call there.
It's a thought. It's a good idea. I know that actually getting to Cedar Island Lighthouse is quite difficult from what I hear. Is that correct?
Yeah, you have to walk out along the beach to get out there. It's a bit of a walk. It's and at low tide, it can be difficult, but you can see it a little bit better from the park itself. That time of year too, the piping plovers will probably be nesting, so there's no way to get out there by vehicle, even if we did have a four-wheel drive available or something.
Right. Okay. So hence a variety of reasons why we're not actually going to that one. Okay, Jeff.
We just have another question. Do we have a cost for this tour posted yet, or are we still working that out?
I know that 13 people have signed up. I'm actually not on that end of things. The Rolands have been handling that.
If the prices is not published on the website, we'll have it done in short order. So look for that next week sometime. And then,
Yeah,
yeah, go
I
ahead.
was just going to say I don't believe the price is actually on the tour page on the
Yeah.
website.
Well, we're still working out details, so we're doing our best, but we should
Yeah.
have it in short order. And
Yeah,
then, Bob, somebody asked how they could get your book.
Bob, that's a question for you.
Yeah, check Amazon for used copies. That's the best way to do it right now. We're coming up, next year will be 20-year anniversary, which is very hard to believe of that book. And I've considered doing doing a revision on it, a second edition, but I just don't know where the time could come from to do that, quite honestly, right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, check Amazon, watch for it. Every so often you'll get one at a decent price. There's a couple on there that are vastly overpriced.
I'm seeing it. I'm seeing 9 used copies from starting at $20.73. I don't know how they get that price, but
Yeah,
so it's
that's a good price right there, I think.
yeah. It's
There's another question. Somebody wrote a book about New York lighthouses. If you send it to me, Rick, we can go ahead and take a look at that and try to do a review for you in the keeper's log.
Can you send me an address? And can I give
It's
you
on
my-
our website. It's USLHS.org.
Okay,
USLHS.org, and just go to contact. You'll find our address on there.
okay.
so Rick, you've written a book on New York lighthouses?
This Lighthouses of New York.
Oh yeah, okay, right. I have that.
Okay, I know all your peeps. I work with the Historical Society. I know Henry real well. They might have the copy of the book at the Montauk Lighthouse store there. I was talking, my wife and I were down in Long Island. We were visiting our son in Connecticut. We went over because I wanted to see how the project was doing. And we went out and we spent a couple nights in Montauk, which is fabulous in the wintertime because there's nobody there. Of course, it's pretty cold. We met the gentleman who runs the bookstore there in Montauk. So he may be carrying it too, but yeah, there's 70 lighthouses in New York, and I got Fire Island on the cover. The publisher Schiffer chose that.
Yeah.
But there's so many factoids about the Long Island lighthouses that are just so much fun, and it's just always, and I commend Bob for putting a Long Island lighthouse book together, because it's always been a challenge. Like there was folks in the Hudson Valley, there's Lake Champlain, and then the whole St. Lawrence Seaway. What's refreshing, not to take away from what you're doing, Jeremy, I'm involved with the Florida Lighthouse Group, Florida Lighthouse. So I've done a book on Florida. Anyway, that's my 10-second plug. And they are actually pretty good about coming up with monies to do restorations of all the 30 lighthouses here in Florida. But
Yeah.
it's been a challenge. I mean, that's one of the biggest difficulties for the present not-for-profit groups to kind of unify and then try and come up with monies wherever they are.
Yeah.
I've listened to the stories of the owners, the not-for-profit groups. So anything you can do to help promote the preservation, that's a super thing.
Hey, Rick, why don't you go ahead and type in the chat the link to how people can actually order your book. If you would like to, you're welcome to do that.
Okay.
And then we have another question. Well, actually, not a question, more of a statement. And Bob, we'll need your help on this. Can we confirm whether Southfield, New York has the distinction of having the most lighthouses in one town?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's true.
There's 8. There's 8 within the township. There's Horton Point, Long Beach Bar, Orient Point, Plum Island, Little Gull Island, Race Rock, North Brother Island, and Latimer Reef.
Right.
I think that's eight right there, right?
Right, what he said. And then we're actually seeing 5 of those according to this person on our tour. So Nancy, thank you for pointing that out.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Scott Sibley just posted that and I see it now too. It's down the bottom of the page for the tour on the website. The price is on there. Double per person, $38.50, single $4,700. So that is on there.
Okay, good. Well, there's no more questions in the chat.
Yeah, and I just want to add to what Rick said about the lighthouses kind of scattered around the different areas in New York. That's a trivia question that people never get the answer to. A lot of people know that Michigan has more lighthouses than any other state. Usually when I ask what state has the most lighthouses, people say Maine. Maine is third.
That's
New York
right.
is second.
Right.
And people never get that. When I say what state is second, usually they go through like every other state in the country before they get New York. So it's close to 100. I'm not sure the precise number, but
No, I have 70 in my book.
Mm-hmm.
And for New York State, it took me 30 years to shoot it.
Oh, I believe it easily. Looks like Nancy Badalato says, I heard that Southold, New York has the distinction of having the most lighthouses of one town. I think it's 8, and this tour visits 5. Yeah, off the top of my head, I can't. Barnstable, Massachusetts, which includes Hyannis as well, and Cape Cod, I think has a number of lighthouses, but I don't think it's quite that many. So I think you're right about that.
Yeah, and there's a fellow who's passed on, Merlin Wiggins, who was involved with a lot of the Southold lighthouses, and he's written a book. I've got it here on my shelf. I forget what it's called, but
Rich,
yes.
I'm sorry, go ahead, sorry.
No, I'm just Merlin Wiggins did a book on the lighthouses of Southold, and at one time he used to do as a fundraiser. We would one day a year use the high-speed ferries and go out of Orient Point, and he would narrate the tour. So I got to go with him one time, my wife and I, and we went to I don't know if it was all, but most of the lighthouses in Southold.
You're muted, Jeremy.
I have no idea how that happened. It must be a ghost here. I didn't touch the mute at all. But anyway, I was saying I knew Merlin a little bit, at least corresponding with him over the years. Certainly, Merlin Wiggin. Yeah.
One of the points you mentioned, Jeremy, about this tour, Montauk was chartered by George Washington. I think that's so interesting. Our first president. And I was looking at Bill Bates. He's on our screen there. He's been on a million of our tours, and he has Portland Head in his background. Wasn't that also chartered by George Washington?
Sort of. What happened was Portland Head was started by the state of Massachusetts a couple of years before it was finished, and they ran out of money, and then the federal government took over lighthouses, and George Washington ordered for it to be completed. So it was the first lighthouse completed under the federal government. And I believe Cape Henry, Virginia was the first one completely built under the federal government.
I love the history of the colonial lighthouses. This is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
That's a chapter in itself.
Yeah. Let's see. We have, yeah, I see a hand raised there. Marthan, if I'm pronouncing your name right, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Yep, and ask your question. Yeah.
Actually, it's not a question. I just wanted to let you guys know, and Bob Muller might be especially interested in this. We are people who were on your very first Long Island Lighthouse Challenge back in 2005. And we also did that same year Maryland Challenge and New Jersey Challenge. Evidence here.
Excellent.
Anyway, it was terrific. This is not my actual certificate, it's a copy of it. But anyway, we were actually on the first one in New Jersey in 2000, the first one in Maryland in 2003, and the first one in Long Island, 2005. And then in 2005, we made sure we did all three so we could each get this certificate. And this is just really terrific to see these lighthouses again in this setting and hear about this tour. We can't travel anymore like that. And we would love to be on this trip because it's so close to home. We live in Maryland and are part of the Chesapeake chapter. And of course, I'm part of the US Lighthouse Society too. And this is just terrific. I love these things, and to be on live is just more fun than I can tell you.
Thank you, Martha. And I know you've taken part in a number of these Zoom events, I believe, right? Yeah.
I think this may be only the second one live, but we've been watching all of the retrospectives coming along when they got on. At first, during COVID, we didn't have a camera and a microphone on our computer. Our computer died, I don't know, sometime the end of last year. And so now we have a new computer and we have a camera and a microphone so we can actually be on live, and we love it.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that. And nice to have you here. Thank you, Martha.
Right.
I see Dan May just posted something in the chat. The museum at Montauk has the original document that was signed under George Washington establishing the light station. Great historical document to see. I know there's a document, and you live in Newburyport, Mass, Dan, and of course Plum Island Lighthouse, the other Plum Island Lighthouse in Massachusetts in Newburyport, has a document signed by George Washington, authorizing the first keeper. So.
Yeah, no, it's great. And thanks, Jeff, for bringing that up. So many interesting things about Montauk to see. Everyone that goes on a tour will really enjoy it because there's just so much history there. And thanks for bringing that up. You can see the original document there. They have it under glass, so it's pretty well protected. But they did some research in hunting that down and were able to acquire it. And it's a great document to see.
Yeah. And I just want to mention while I'm thinking of it that the last I saw, there were, I think it was in the neighborhood of 13 or 15 people signed up for the tour. There's certainly room for more. So if you're interested, don't wait too long, but there's room for plenty more at this point. So I'm not, does the cost include the hotel? Yes. The answer to that is yes. Jeff, I don't know if you want to respond to that question in any more detail.
Yeah, the tours are all inclusive except for the flights or your travel to the point of the origination and departure. So once you get to the welcome dinner, pretty much everything's included.
Yeah.
Another thing I was thinking of, talking about the Long Island Challenge and stuff, Bob Muller, you and I think we first met, it had to be at least 20 years ago. Remember Long Island Lighthouse Safaris? Gail, I can't think of her last name.
Gail Haynes, who's a former president of the Fire Island Lighthouse Preservation Society. Yeah, she used to run tours, and I would guide some of those tours back then. Yep.
I did a tour with you back then. Yeah. I think that was our first association.
You mentioned Jeremy Stephen Pleasanton in your presentation. I don't know if everybody knows Stephen Pleasanton. He has a interesting history, but one of the things that reminds me of him is what Dan mentioned about the original document signed by George Washington. And when the Civil War was happening and the South was attacking, it was Stephen Pleasanton was credited to have saved the original Declaration of Independence, which was hanging on the wall in his office or in the offices of the Lighthouse Service. Do you remember that?
I think that was during the War of 1812, wasn't it?
1812. Yeah, but he's credited about actually saving the original Declaration of Independence, which is, to me, fascinating.
He peaked kind of early. It's all downhill from there.
Right. That was before he was in charge of lighthouses.
but he's often thought of as a villain in lighthouse history, but he was just doing his job. It was his job to not spend money, and he did it well, if you look at it that way.
Sure.
So somebody asked, how do we get a copy of this presentation to share with others who are not able to attend? I will get it online, probably, I'm going to say maybe tomorrow, but certainly by early in the week, probably Monday, on the USLHS YouTube channel. It'll also be posted on the uslhs.org website itself. So just watch for that, and please spread the word. And that goes for anything we do, these Zoom events, the podcast, news about tours, and anything we post on social media. Please share these things, share them on social media, tell your friends. The more sharing, the better, believe me. So we appreciate that. So Bob or Jeff, I don't know if you guys want to add anything before we sign off for today.
No, thanks everybody for coming. Nice spending part of my Saturday with you.
And thank you.
Yeah, and I'm happy to have been here. Thanks for doing this, Jeremy. This is exciting. I hope to be able to spend some time with the tour group on this. And May is a great time to be on Long Island. The traffic's not as bad yet, but we'll have some flowers up and hopefully some very nice weather for it.
Sounds good to me. And I'm very excited that you're helping out and going to be part of some of the tour. It's really a great addition. So thank you so much. And thanks for being here today, Bob. Thank you all so much. We don't have any more Zoom events scheduled at the moment, but we will soon. So watch for notices on that. And we'll see you again next time. So thank you all and take care.